Today on the channel, I want to talk about the best music track from every indie game, at least every indie game that I've played so far. Now the rules are simple. I'm going to be choosing one composition from every indie video game, and I'm going to be crowning that composition as the best out of that game's entire soundtrack. Now keep in mind, music is mostly subjective, so be sure to let me know in the comments what would you choose for these picks. I've been doing some longer intros lately, so to help with that, we're going to just go ahead and get started right after I shout out my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting, and yeah, let's get into it. We're going to begin in alphabetical order with a game called Animal Well. This is one of those games that kinda relies more so on atmospheric music. I'm just going to give it to its title screen theme. There's just not much substance here. And now we can move on to a game with an amazing soundtrack, Blasphemous. Just straight up beautiful Spanish instruments throughout the entire OST. There are many bangers here, but I'm going to choose Su Beso de Plata Redux. This plays during a very emotional final stage in the Crescenta boss fight and only plays in the true ending via New Game Plus. Because of this, many players unfortunately miss out on the amazing atmosphere in this fight, but the boss theme is truly a ride. It's a bit of a drawn out track, but ever since I acquired a taste for this game's music, I haven't been able to keep this thing off my playlist. It just encapsulates how important this moment is in the game, because I mean, if we're talking about difficulty, this basically is the final challenge in the game, even if it's not the final boss. This was not an easy choice because there are so many beautiful compositions in this game, but I'm happy with the one I went with. And now we can move on to Blasphemous II, a sequel with similarly beautiful music, but the one that sticks out to me the most is Corona de Siete Osiris. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. The reason I love this track so much is it's just so unapologetically Spanish. Like, this is the track I think of now when someone just brings up Spain in general. It's so stereotypical yet so charming because of it. It's genuinely just super fun to listen to. You'll hear some different things happen throughout. At one point there's a piano, which is pretty interesting. It's just got a lot going for it. And because of that, I couldn't keep it off the list. Coming up next is Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, and this is a game that I already said in a previous video. My favorite thing about it in general is the music. A big reason being the theme of the first area in the game, Voyage of Promise. Very majestic and really does set the tone for what you're going to hear throughout the game's entirety. The music in Bloodstained is basically classical music if it had drums, which I think is a fantastic combination. My favorite combination of music genres in general because it fixes my only issue with classical music, and that's how it tends to feel redundant with not very much progression throughout the piece. Actually, maybe that's an ignorant statement, just you know what I mean. I like classical music that's a little bit modernized. Adding a few modern instruments into a classical based composition is a phenomenal idea, and this one just absolutely slaps. Up next is Bug Fables, which is a game I recently finished. Think of it as Paper Mario, except everything is a bug. When I first started playing this game, the music was a bit cheesy, but it does get better as the game progresses. If I were to choose a piece to consider the best, I'd go with Team It's Getting Serious. This is the battle theme for the more difficult enemies that appear past the game's halfway point. It has a very fitting name, as this is indeed where it gets serious. There's a couple things I like about this composition. First of all, I like how they're not afraid to experiment with some 8-bit sounds, even though the game has nothing to do with the 8-bit art style. Just adding a couple instances of 8-bit instruments being used makes it feel much more like an upbeat video game experience. This theme is also pretty jazzy, especially the blues scale piano segment about a minute in, and if you know how much of a professional jazz hater I truly am, it should surprise you that I really love this composition. You know what, I'm gonna say it, Bug Fables is the best Paper Mario game, and that means a lot. I've played the Thousand Year Door. Next up is Dead Cells, and this is a game with a ton of pretty great compositions, but at least to my knowledge, not any that are undisputably better than everything else. Of course, take that with a grain of salt because a lot of the content in this game I still have not experienced, but I did technically beat the game. Anyway, there's a couple compositions that I'm considering for this decision. I could go with a couple of the really good Castlevania remixes that are in this game thanks to the DLC, but I think I'll just go with the Prisoner Escape theme, which is the theme that plays in in the first area of the game. You'll notice in this video, I typically have a big bias for the first levels in games. I just think when done right, they exceptionally set the tone for the entire rest of the OST. And since this is a roguelike, you'll be going through this area a lot, and the music just perfectly represents the feeling your character is experiencing. The music feels familiar, yet also anxiety-inducing. It just makes you feel like you're rushing to get back to where you were before you died, and I just really think it does represent Dead Cells magnificently. It fits the game as perfect as can be, and for that, I have to choose it for this list. We're not going to spend much time on Deltarune since the game isn't finished yet, but out of the OST that's released so far, I really like Field of Hopes and Dreams. It's just extremely catchy, and catchiness isn't usually something I look for, at least compared to everybody else. Usually I like something that sounds badass and enlightening, but hey, this track truly is a vibe. It's the most memorable track in Deltarune at this very moment, at least it was for me. Coming up next is Lilies, a game that has been praised for its fantastic piano compositions, my favorite of these being a track called North. I just think the harmony here is pretty beautiful. It's got soft moments, it's got epic moments. Out of all the good piano music this game introduced me to, this composition was the most innovative, and I really hadn't heard any other game sound quite like it. I'm sorry I didn't have much to say about this one, it's just a really good piano composition, and that's pretty much it. For that reason, it has to be my choice for Lilies. Real quick before we move on to the next entry, just wanted to take a few seconds to give a shout out to Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. This is a new indie game that people have described as the indie Skyrim that recently released a little over a week ago, and the people behind the game are super nice, and they reached out to me to give me free access to the game as well as sending me a collector's edition. This thing is huge, and I just want to point out that they did all of this without me even making any promises to them. So yeah, they didn't tell me to say this about their game, but seriously, I just wanted to show you guys how generous they've been. Thank you to Questline, the developers, and thank you to the rest of the people behind Tainted Grail. Once again, I appreciate you guys being so generous. Now let's get back to the main show. Next is Gravity Circuit, an indie side-scroller inspired by the Mega Man games. The game is awesome, but the music isn't really my thing. However, if I had to choose my favorite, it would be Arc Stage 3. This plays in the final level of the game and is a very dramatic sounding stage for a side-scrolling game. It does justice to the fact that you're about to save the planet and the robots that inhabit it. I especially love the inclusion of the Mitsuda's Lick fragment, as if you've watched my recent video on Undertale, you know that the Mitsuda's Lick is basically used to describe a heroic moment in video game music. Great inclusion and really helps with the dramatization of this level. And next up is Hollow Knight, a game with some beautiful orchestra, and even though there are some excellent boss themes, I'm actually gonna go with the most immersive track in the entire game, the City of Tears theme. This plays in the best area in the game, the City of Tears, and it's just straight up beautiful to listen to. It's incredibly somber and melancholic, which perfectly fits the atmosphere because it's this dark, Baroque-inspired city. I know I'm kinda breaking my own rules here by choosing the softer composition instead of the epic boss fight, but hey, just be sure to leave an angry comment about it. I could use the engagement these days. Islets is next, and this is a game with alright music. My favorite of the bunch is called Solarium. This game is a Metroidvania side-scroller, and the main theme is that you're attempting to reconnect these 4 floating islands in order to form one giant island. So it takes place in the sky, meaning that there's also segments where you're inside a flying ship. Anyway, this theme is for the town where you go to take quests, buy items, typical video game town stuff. It's very emotional, however, and gives you the feeling of exploration, since you're so high up in the sky. It's very nice and kept me really relaxed whenever I was in this area of the game, so that's why I chose it. Next on the list is Lethal Company, a horror game from 2023 that you most likely remember playing with your friends. You also probably remember that it's not really the type of game to have good music. Because of that, I'm just gonna choose the theme of the music box in this game because it's upbeat and cool, I guess. It's pretty catchy, and for a game like Lethal Company, that's all you need. Up next is a Metroidvania that released last year, Nine Souls, and be careful because this entry involves spoilers if you haven't played the game yet, because I chose the true final boss theme, The Path for Us All, an epic orchestration to cap off one of the best Metroidvania games out there. Now personally, I didn't really like the rest of Nine Souls' music, as it was just a lot of atmospheric stuff, which is something I can't usually put on my playlist, and I'm not saying I dislike all atmospheric music. It was just, for Nine Souls, it didn't really hit the right spots for me. But this theme really is just perfect. And again, I'm sorry to spoil this boss fight, but this is the best boss fight in Metroidvania history, so that only makes the moment so much better. I really recommend you experience this composition for yourself. Next on the list is Pizza Tower, a platformer with wacky yet still fantastic music. Many people will point to the final few levels of this game when finding the best music of the OST. However, I have to go with the most iconic track in Pizza Tower. It's Pizza Time. In Pizza Tower, the main gimmick of the level design is that once you reach the end of the level, you attack this giant purple stone dude, and then you need to speedrun back to the entrance, usually taking different twists and turns to spice things up and keep it unpredictable. Anyway, it's Pizza Time is the composition that plays during these moments. In spectacular Pizza Tower fashion, this theme is absolutely batshit insane, having extremely wacky instruments and sound fonts, random ass sound effects implemented out of nowhere. It seems like it would be a complete mess, but it all just works so perfectly to create an insane atmosphere. This really is one of the most creative compositions in video game history. Coming up next is Sea of Stars, and what's unique about this game is they actually got one of the most legendary composers in gaming history, Yasunori Mitsuda, to do some work on the game. Only a few tracks, however. The rest of it is composed by Eric W. Brown. Sea of Stars has a ton of great music, especially given the fact that Mitsuda worked on the game. However, my favorite composition from this game is actually from Eric W. Brown, and that's Encounter Elite. This is just the theme for most of the boss fights in this game, and boy does it hype you up. It begins with a build-up as most boss themes do, and later on we get to see some almost Japanese sounding instruments going on, and I like to think of that as some kind of homage to The Messenger, which is a game that was made by the same people behind Sea of Stars, and we'll also talk about that game in a few minutes. Also, this track has a segment that sounds eerily familiar to the Moon theme from DuckTales, all the way back on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let me just show you what I mean. I don't know if it's just me, but that sounds like almost the exact same melody. Overall, there's a ton of variety going on in this piece, and that's why I wanted to choose it for this spot. Next on the list is Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. This game's OST wasn't really for me. I just didn't remember too much of it. It was a good game though, and I think I'll give the OST award to, We Love Burning Town. That's the name of the track. This plays in the first level of the game, and it's very oriental, and that's it. That's my reason. I just like to hear music from different cultures. Also, there's a Mitsuda's lick in this track as well, and as you know by now, I'm quite fond of those. But yeah, that's really it. So let's move on to another pixel platformer, Shovel Knight. Again, I'm not really a huge fan of the sound fonts used in Shovel Knight, but there is one track in particular that I really adore, and that's High Above the Land. Now, the first few seconds of this track is irredeemable garbage, but that doesn't matter because the rest is awesome. The track takes place in a level where you invade a bunch of flying airships, kinda like in Super Mario Bros. 3, and also similarly to that game, the music slaps. This track really taught me that sometimes, even if you don't necessarily like the sound fonts or instruments, sometimes a melody is simply too good to dislike. And that's what I think about this track from Shovel Knight. Not a huge fan of the overall sound fonts, but a huge fan of the melodies found in this composition. Moving on to Stardew Valley. Unlike the last two entries, this OST truly is my type of music, and my favorite of the bunch is probably Nature's Crescendo, which is one of the themes that plays during the summertime. It's got everything going for it, especially since you hear this track immediately upon the arrival of the summer season. Everything is just so lively, and even though summer isn't the greatest season in real life, it's a fantastic one in Stardew Valley because you can't get bit by mosquitoes through the TV screen. There are many other great tracks in in Stardew Valley, however, and they span across all seasons and areas in the game. Maybe you prefer the cave music for how adventurous it is, or maybe you like the melancholic winter themes. This is one of those games where I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer for which composition is best, so I'm open to hearing what you think is the best. And up next is going to be Terraria. If you guys want a reason to drop a dislike, I actually think Terraria's music is a bit overrated. I would still consider it to be a great soundtrack though. There's a few good choices for this list. You could go with Plantera's boss theme, Empress of Light's boss theme, but my favorite track has always been the Underground Jungle. Actually, I say it's always been my favorite, but this track was actually added pretty late in Terraria's life, that being in a post 1.4 update. Still, I know that I typically prefer melodic music rather than atmospheric music, but I still really enjoy the atmosphere of Terraria's Underground Jungle, and it's all thanks to this composition. And coming up next is the Angry Video Game Nerd 1 and 2 Deluxe, which is basically a YouTuber game based on the Angry Video Game Nerd series on YouTube. And obviously, since I've played through this game, that means I absolutely adore the series. Because I do, it's the main inspiration behind this channel. Anyway, if I'm being honest, this game is actually super fun, and the music ain't bad either. In fact, it's surprisingly awesome. There's two compositions in particular that I'm considering, but I'm gonna go with Future F***balls. Yes, that is the name of the composition. I am dead serious. Now, you may have heard this track before because it's kind of iconic, but basically this game's soundtrack goes for an 8-bit sound, except a lot more modernized. This makes it so it still keeps the same type of pitches and sound fonts as an NES game. However, unlike a game like Shovel Knight, it removes the scratchiness that would tend to happen with old 8-bit music. So basically, it's retro but improved on, and I think that's a fantastic combination. I love this theme in particular because it's just so energetic. It's not something I listen to regularly, but when I'm playing the game, it's a great complement to the experience. And up next is The Messenger. I told you we would get to this one. Like I mentioned, this is a game made by the same people behind Sea of Stars, Sabotage Studios, and actually takes place in the same universe. It's got some great music too. I wanted to pick the theme of the first level in the game since it's very stereotypically ninja-like, but it has a bit of that scratchy 8-bit sound that I mentioned less than 30 seconds ago. Instead, I'm gonna go with Water and Wind, which is a 16-bit composition with great variety and still sounds very ninja-like too. This game has a lot of catchy music, not anything incredible, but you will catch yourself humming the tune. It's also really cool that this game has such a balance between 8-bit and 16-bit music, and the fact that each composition has its own 8 and 16-bit versions. But for this list, I'm choosing to highlight Water and Wind in specific. And last but certainly not least, we have Undertale. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is the most loved soundtrack out of any indie game out there, but the question is, what's the best track in the OST? This is something that we will probably never be able to agree on because there's simply so many bangers. Do you want a classic atmospheric masterpiece like Another Medium, the theme of an Elvis Presley robot, or an intense battle that decides the fate of all living beings? To me, it has to be the latter, but which boss theme is better? Battle Against a True Hero or Megalovania? These are the two bosses of the genocide route of Undertale, and there is so much phenomenal emotion in both of these tracks. I've already made a video about Battle Against a True Hero and the boss encounter that goes with it, so make sure to check that out if you're interested. But at this point in time, I'm actually gonna go with Megalovania on this one. I know people like to have original opinions and not just say that, oh, Megalovania is the best because it's the most popular, but no, I think even outside of the memes, this theme is a generational composition. This entire encounter is about Sans, someone who never wanted to fight you, but now has to after all of his friends were murdered by you, and the theme replicates that because it's kinda goofy at the beginning, which fits Sans' normally goofy and unserious personality, but then it becomes an emotional roller coaster as it gets louder and more destructive. Even outside of the memes, I believe it to be a truly perfect video game composition that represents the area it's placed in better than blue represents the sky. So there we go. That was pretty much every indie game I have played and the best music composition from them. Now, there were a couple games that I decided to leave off the list for today, mostly because I sadly didn't remember any of the music from these games. So hopefully that's not too disappointing, but I hope you enjoyed the rest of the list, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. That's it for me. Have a good one.